Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the DeYoung Museum. My name is Devin Malone, and I'm the Director of Public Programs and Community Engagement at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. I'm excited to welcome you to Making America, Conversations on Creative Work and Freedom of Expression, and our first of two discussions for the day, a conversation on interpreting American art. Before I get into my many thank yous, I want to first situate us for what I hope will be two generative and insightful discussions. This program was born out of an invitation by our partners at the Lunder Institute for American Art at Colby College, and a question they posed: what is the state of American art? As I pondered this question and many others that came up since this relationship with the Lunder began, I landed on the idea that because America, at 248 years old, is a recent invention, an infant empire, if you will, it is thrashing and wailing with the beauty and violence of a thing becoming and unbecoming itself. And that is reflected in both what we make and what we do not. As empire struggles against itself, we witness the proliferation of legislation that threatens our access to knowledge, as well as our freedom of expression, annihilationist foreign policy, and housing crises all over the country, including here in San Francisco. I'm endlessly curious about what it means to make in this context, but also what it means to unmake, unlearn, and reimagine. Over the course of this afternoon, I hope you leave with some sense of not only how artists and other creative folks work in and through this landscape, but also how you might make and unmake something of it for yourselves. Before passing the mic to Erica Wall, Director of the Lunder Institute for American Art, I want to first thank her and the Lunder Institute for their kind invitation, Colby College Museum of Art, and of course, Colby College. I also want to thank Sheila Presley, Director of Education at FAMSF, as well as my incredible team who make magic happen at the museums every day: Maria Aguaville, Rocio Garcia, and Rosario Sotelo. And thanks to all of you for choosing to spend your Saturday with us.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome all of you here. And I have such great excitement, anticipation, and gratitude for having you join us. As Devin said, this is the first of 6 programs of the inaugural launch of Lunder Institute at. The Lunder Institute for American Art is a research institute, and it is part of the Colby College Museum of Art. It serves as a think tank for the museum and the field of American art, but it also serves as a very unique compass, one that directs the field and its practitioners toward not just one North Star, but a galaxy of stars that have yet to be explored. And it is with opportunity that the Institute seeks out questions that prompt and sustain this exploration. So, as we ask the DeYoung, what is the state of American art? We are asking, what is the state of America and its art, and how that is reflected in discourse, research, scholarship, and art production. As we know, art institutions play an immense role in this ongoing exploration and how we share that work with you, the public. So Lunder Institute at is intended to create a vehicle and a space for different institutions to be in conversation with one another. And so with that, I want to thank the DeYoung Museum for being in conversation and partnership with the Lunder Institute for American Art. I want to specifically thank Tom Campbell, its director, and its amazing staff of program partners, starting with Sheila Presley, Devin Malone, Abram Jackson, and Maria Aguaville, for collaborating, designing, and implementing what I'm confident is going to be a spectacular program today. I also want to take this opportunity to express my sincerest thanks to Peter and Paula Lunder and the Lunder Foundation for making the Lunder Institute for American Art possible, and for the many ways in which this unique platform builds communities and benefits not only those at Colby College, but as we see here today, it also is about the discourse and the practice of American art throughout the country and beyond. So again, thanks to all of you, and join me as we partake in today's program. And I will hand it over to Abram Jackson.
Just checking to see if my mic is on, and it is. Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. This is so exciting to have you all here. Welcome to folks that are live streaming. It's truly an honor to be here for a conversation on interpreting American art. And so my name is Abram Jackson. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the inaugural director of interpretation here at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, which includes the De Young, where we're at, and also the Legion of Honor. As the inaugural director, I think part of my context is that I'm in some ways, I can't claim that for much longer, an art world outsider of sorts. And I was really, really excited about the opportunity to be in conversation with folks who have done this work for a while. And so Lisa Silberstein and Erica Gangsei, their interpretive work has had a poignant impact on me even before I came into the art world. And so I'm so honored that you all are here and excited to begin. So first, before we begin the show, I wanted to read their very illustrious and wonderful bios, and then we'll get into the conversation. So Lisa Silberstein uses she, her pronouns and has worked at the Oakland Museum of California since 2008 and is a manager of learning, experience, and programming in the area of experience development. She's responsible for leading the interpretation, interactive, and community engagement elements that are a part of exhibitions and gallery installations. Some of Lisa's recent projects have included Angela Davis Seize the Time, Hella Feminist, the Black Power section of the History Gallery, Queer California, Untold Stories, and All Power to the People, Black Panthers at 50. Prior to OMCA, she worked at the Contemporary Jewish Museum and with the photography program for teens in Guatemala. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
And we also have Erica Gangsei. They use she, they pronouns, and is the director of interpretive media at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, SF-MoMA, where she has worked since 2006. She leads a small but mighty team in the strategy around and creation of educational resources such as audio tours, podcasts, artist video, interviews, animations, games, and interpretive galleries. That's a lot. She is also a sculptor and brings her firsthand experience with creative practice to her museum work. Prior to joining SF-MoMA, Erica worked for the ACLU and in New York City politics. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. And hello to all of you and you out there in TV land.
So, as a inaugural director of interpretation, and when I tell people I'm the director of interpretation, there is a rush of confusion over their faces. I see it. And often the follow-up question is, what does that mean? What do you do exactly? And so I also understand that might be different from institution to institution. So with that, I thought a first really kind of good question for you all to offer is, how do you respond to the question of what you do as interpretation professionals?
Sure. I mean, I'll start by just saying I think that interpretation is a field that's really centered in the audience and in the museum visitor. And so what I say when people ask what I do as an interpretation professional is I work to give the visitor a scaffolding to help them have a more meaningful experience with the museum and with the museum visit. I think a museum in general can be a really intimidating place, and a modern and contemporary art museum can come with its own particular flavor of intimidation. And so my job as somebody who grew up going to museums in New York City is really to help visitors feel as if the museum is for them in some way, to help them gain some insight, but not by giving them answers, not by trying to put facts inside their head, by empowering them to understand that they're already bringing the tools with them from the very start of their visit to look at and to connect with modern and contemporary art. It's really about helping them find that power within themselves to connect with what we have on view.
Yeah, I relate to a lot of that. So my role is experience developer, which obviously gets a lot of questions when people ask me what I do, and I have to explain it. So I usually say that I am it's like a combination of curatorial and interpretation. So that's how I interpret it. Technically, I'm visitor advocate. I'm on exhibition development teams with the curator, with the designer and with the project manager, and we are really collaboratively developing the exhibition together. So I'm in this role. Experienced developers are really holding education, interpretation, perspective, but it's a collaborative effort. It's ensemble. I say it's ensemble work because we're doing it together. And as you said in my bio, like I'm responsible for really making the work that we're showing, the content that we're expressing, accessible, relevant, and engaging to the widest audience possible. That's sort of our objectives. And we do that in a variety of different ways, including text, and, interactive experiences, working closely with media folks, audio and visual folks, and we develop interpretive plans that have our visitor outcomes and our key messages, which we measure. We have incredible in-house evaluation, which I highly recommend all institutions. So we test what we're trying to do and seeing if our audiences are actually understanding what we're trying to put forth. And also, I, in this role, work really closely with community partners to get community voices into our exhibitions and develop parts of exhibitions with community. So it's a lot of different things, but it's a great job, and I love it.
I appreciate those responses, and it just makes me think about if we were to ask, a room full of interpretation professionals, there would be a lot of through lines, and then some additions, that are just speak to the ethos of being visitor-centered at the heart. I was curious, random question of sorts, but there's a favorite movie of mine called Love and Hip Hop, where it begins with vignettes of people being asked when they fell in love with hip hop. And so I want to just take a step back a little bit and ask that question to you all in this context. When did you fall in love with art, American art? What was the moment? Can you take us back to that moment of encounter?
I can take it. So I fell in love with art at a very young age, and it was something that was important to me as a young person. I just want to kind of step back from get into the American art part of it, if that's all right. So I work at the Oakland Museum of California, so I really see, OMCA, we're called OMCA for short, and I really have seen the work that we do and the content that we're presenting not as American, but as Californian, which is also a complicated topic. So for me, I have questions about what American means. To me, there's a lot of Americas. Are we talking about the United States of America? Are we talking about Central America, South America, people that came to America or born in America? I kind of want to poke holes at all of that. And we at the Oakland Museum of California also have, using Californian as a framing device is also lots of holes could be poked in Californian. What makes someone a Californian? Is there an essence of a Californian? All those things, I think we could poke at and we grapple with ourselves at the museum. But then I guess I want to just share about how I fell in love with this work in particular. So I was telling Erica earlier, I knew that I wanted to work in an art museum from a pretty young age, which I think of as kind of dorky, but here I am. And so I went to grad school at the very young age of 23 for a master's in art history. And when I got there, I had a lot of struggle with the jargon that was being used and the language that was being used to describe art that I felt like was really inaccessible and exclusionary and elitist. And I was raised by educators and
who are here in the audience.
Who are here in the audience. Shout out to my parents. And they, I really wanted, I was pushing against this jargon, and I knew I had to participate in it as part of this master's program. But I was like, I don't want to do that. To me, I want to make art more accessible and not less accessible for people. To me, this is exclusionary and not welcoming. And so that sort of sparked for me a desire. I finished my master's degree, but I went on to work. I wanted to work in museum education and to really work to make visitors feel invited into the conversation and that they could see themselves in whatever was being presented in any kind of museum, but in particular an art museum, and that their voices and their opinions were in some ways just as valid as the words that were written about those artworks by other people. So that is sort of where it all began for me.
Oh, that's beautiful. How would you answer that question?
So many answers.
I know.
And I really want to say a lot of that, especially about making exclusionary spaces feel accessible, speaks to what I'm trying to do as well. So thinking a lot about that, and one thing that I've come to understand is that my first and sort of forever favorite artist is Jim Henson, and that a lot of my early experiences with American art are actually early experiences with the quintessential American art form of television.
Wow.
And so, that's just something that I would share because I think that it informs a lot of my practice as an interpretive media professional, in terms of the experience and background that I bring to this work. I have a learning disability, and so college was incredibly hard for me. And the way that I actually made it through college was by finding people who had done more of the reading than I had and interviewing them about it. And that is actually one of the primary skills that I use as an interpretation professional, is to interview people who have a scholarly background, but also I'd say part of what I do, and this is really the heart of what I do, is to recenter what kinds of expertise we're looking for when we are doing our storytelling. In terms of a definition of American art, I think the other thing that I would say is I think that with the rise of internationalism and the blue chip art market and the sort of sameness that you see in a lot of museums and art galleries, no matter where in the world you are, I don't think I really fully understood the concept of a localized art world until I moved here to the Bay Area in 2003 to attend the San Francisco Art Institute and really came to understand the particularities of the Bay Area art scene as an art scene that's focused on generosity, thinking about muralism, thinking about social practice as quintessential Bay Area art forms. And so another answer would be that I fell in love with American art when I moved to San Francisco.
Wow. And you all both have worked in this field since the early aughts. And so I imagine you've witnessed some shifts. As you reflect about that, what have you noticed as it relates to art museum interpretation? What shifts have you noticed?
I can go first on this one. So, I think one of the things that's been really interesting is to see the progression of democratization in the way that stories are told, the way that stories are told and also by whom since the early aughts. And I think that it really did start with Web 2.0 and the rise of social media and the sort of here comes everybody era. But that since that time, that democratization of voice and the centering of perspectives from, first of all, outside the field of art history, and secondly, outside the fields of scholarship at all, is really a trend that I'm seeing continue and something that I very much welcome.
Yeah, for me, this has been part of the work since I've been in the work, and so I'm excited that lots of other people are joining me
They're
now.
catching up to how you,
basically the centering the visitor, thinking about the stories that we're not hearing, the untold stories, the perspectives that are not being shared, the sharing authority, all of these concepts, the fact that this is becoming normalized, and we're seeing positions like yours, Abram, at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. We're seeing this, that is really exciting to me because I've been thinking about this work, and I've been in this field for 20 something years, but so I'm not that old, but I've been doing this for a while, and there is a community, and I definitely stand on the shoulders of a lot of museum educators who've been doing this work for decades, and I appreciate them and have learned from them, and I'm grateful to be working in a museum in this moment. I think it's a really exciting time to be in the museum field. I think culture is shifting, and it's only going to benefit all of us and all the museums, and so so I want more of it. So let's do it.
And speaking of this moment, right, this current social political climate, Devin wonderfully kind of captured it in the introduction. And what do you make of the role of an interpretation professional in this moment in particular? Like, how does it make a difference? What's happening outside of the walls of the museum now than before?
I think it definitely makes a difference, and I think now more than ever we need to be doing the work that interpreters are doing. I think, as I said, culture's shifting, perspectives are changing. People are seeing that people are hungry for this too, and I think we have a responsibility to allow the multiplicity of voices, to allow this work to happen, and it makes our work better too. I'll give one example of something that happened recently. We, at the Oakland Museum of California, so I should also say that we're not just an art museum. So I'm sitting kind of in an American art panel, like I'm a little bit an unusual person here, but the Oakland Museum of California is actually 3 different museums that merged into one: an art museum, a history museum, and a natural science museum. And so we're really looking at things at those 3 separate collections, but all of the intersections in between, right, and looking at culture kind of writ large. And then on top of that, this lens of like California and the Bay Area and specifically Oakland. So, that allows like a lot more room in how we're talking about things and how we're interpreting things. One of our practices at the museum has been to have community advisory groups, and one of our advisory groups is a Native Advisory Council that we've had for 20-something years. And they were formed to help us. We did a big reinstallation project, and we co-created a section in the History Gallery that is called Before the Other People Came, which is their title. And it goes through all of the different regions in California and the Native people that live there. Recently, we meet with them several times a year, and we were in that gallery with them, and they hadn't been there in a while, and they were looking at the language that was on the wall there. And it said, we lived in the coastal, we lived on the rocky coast. We lived in the coastal plains. And they were like, wait a second, this language is past tense. Like, why is this language past tense? And they demanded that we change the language, and they suggested that we cross out the D, and so it would say lived and say still. So we still live on the rocky coast, we still live in the coastal plains. And what we decided to do internally was that instead of just making that change and not saying anything about it, we worked with our graphics team and we crossed out the D. We put like a vinyl cross out on the D and added a caret with still and put that above and left it like that. And then we realized that people were going to need a little bit of hand holding around that. And so we added a panel that says, culture is shifting, language evolves. We worked with our Native Advisory Council to create this section. And recently we've made some changes. Do you notice what the changes are? And why do you think we made those changes? So that allows for like this conversation to continue, and it's not just something that's like, okay, we did that and now we're good, but like let's talk about what's going on right now around all of this.
Wow, I love the dynamism of that. It's ever evolving, and it's not the last shift.
No, there will be many more shifts, and they have a lot of other changes we need to make. So lots of work to be done.
That's so inspiring, just in terms of including visitors in an understanding that our own thinking as museum professionals or as institutions is constantly shifting and evolving. So in terms of thinking about the current socio-political climate, I think something that I can't help but touch on is that my institution went through a very public DEI reckoning in the summer of 2020. At the same time, because of the financial circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic, my team was cut in half. So we went from 10 people to 5. And the sort of nature of those two circumstances meant that I needed to focus and prioritize. And what I came out of that with was a real clarity of purpose around how we would direct our energies, and an understanding that we would be directing our energy towards traditionally marginalized voices. So artists from traditionally marginalized communities, community voices, and also very specifically focusing on platforming the stories of people whose stories had not yet been told. So one of the things that was really advantageous, in terms of the opportunity that came out of that, is we were lucky enough to have received an IMLS grant to tell the story of the muralists who were active in San Francisco's Mission District in the 70s and early 80s. And this was a group of artists who had been incredibly impactful in terms of the city and the city's cultural ecosystem and cultural vibrancy, but had not been recognized by a major institution such as SF MoMA. And the project actually came about in advance of our exhibition Diego Rivera's America, where my then boss did the very smart and very necessary thing of going out to the local Chicanx community and asking, on the occasion of this exhibition, how might the museum support your priorities? And what they said is, this is living art history that is, these individuals are aging out of being able to tell their story. It was just after Rene Yanez had passed, and there was a real palpable sense that these stories needed to be documented. And because of that drive towards community-centered storytelling, we were able to do 20 oral histories, a documentary film, and an audio guide that doubled as a podcast in order to document and broadcast these stories. And I really do think that that's the role that we can play. And what I'm finding more and more is that is the role, not just that I'm fighting for us to play, but that is the role that the institution is asking for us to play, is how might we center community. And the other thing about that project is it was structured in such a way that community members were actually active participants in the selection of subject matter, even reviewing cuts of the audio and the film before the content was published. And that project has actually become a model for how community can be centered in the institution's storytelling in the future.
I think you kind of alluded to this, but relate it to this work, because it's not always glorious and collaborative in the kumbaya sense, right? There's also, I imagine, have you experienced any elements of pushback, whether from artists or from the institution itself, in terms of this work of being visitor-centered and bringing new voices to the table?
I can start out and just say, I think that everybody who does this work experiences pushback, and I do think that it's sort of dependent on individual circumstance, institutional circumstance, and even regional circumstance, the nature of that pushback or how, overt it is. But I do think that everybody who does this work experiences some pushback, and part of the reason why is we're actually shifting the gravitational center of institutions by operationalizing this work and systematizing this work within the systems in terms of, how early in an exhibition planning process does interpretation have a seat at the table, and, how are we centering the story of an exhibition? Is the story of an exhibition centered around scholarship? Is this a story of an exhibition centered around, a story of collectors? Is the center of the story, a visitor and the questions that they might have, or, problematizing certain aspects of museum practice that might not be comfortable for people who hold institutional power to address. So I do think that everybody faces pushback in some form or another. So, I have, but I do think that every conversation about it is constructive.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess to that point, I would say, so because the role of experienced developer is embedded in the project from the beginning, there is less pushback because we're there from the beginning. And we're creating
like an afterthought.
Yeah,
sure.
we are creating and bringing in, hey, we're gonna want to do some intense community work over here, and we're going to have a visitor response thing over here, and that is part of the plan. So for me, there always is a little pushback, but it's much less because of the way it's designed and the way that we are working as an ensemble. And I will say too, because we've been doing this work in this way for a while now, like everyone has understands this is the process, and so things come up where we might say, okay, we're going to be interpreting this way. And, across the whole institution, some people may have, that might not be comfortable for some people, but we talk about it and we work it through. And there's a deep, I would say, generally speaking, a level of trust that other folks in the institution have in, us in creating the exhibitions and interpreting the exhibitions. And so if we want to do something, they generally understand, they believe that, yeah, this is what we should be doing. It might take them a while to hear about why we're doing it. And we might have to present I don't want to say a case, but we might have to present, this is why we feel like it's really important for us to do this as a co-created project, that it's going to take more time and money, and, because we really want to have authentic voices of people's lived experience, and working with community takes more time and money. So there is pushback, but we tend to work it through, and that is all the way up from with the board, leadership, other staff members.
Yeah, it sounds like the pushback is actually very generative at the end of the day, right? And that you've built a sense of buy-in, both of you, in terms of the work within the institution, where there's a trust there. That I think is an important part of the work, that the institution trusts your experience and insight.
I do have one more thing to say, which is this is where evaluation and analytics are so key, because if you have metrics, if you have data supporting a certain interpretive approach, that is undeniable.
100%, and I think that helps us, the fact that we have in-house evaluation, and we can say, this is what our visitors want, and it's different than what you want, and we're here to serve our visitors.
Tell me about in-house evaluation. How does that work for you all? Is there
there's a team, so we have a head of visitor insights and interpretation, and we've had that role for at least starting since I've been there in one form or another, and that person has a team of folks who are interviewing, surveying and interviewing visitors. And when we develop our interpretation strategies, we're in conversation with them about is this measurable? What our outcomes are these things that we could actually measure. And then those interviews are conducted, and then we get data from them, and they present, and then we meet and make change, basically say, okay, this is what we learned from this, and this is what we would do differently next time.
Wow, it's baked in.
It's baked in, and it's very organized. It's data folks, so they're very organized, and there's lots of resources for us to learn from. So highly recommend evaluation if you can do it.
Yeah. I'm wondering about your kind of proudest moment related to this work. If you reflect about your time, what's a proud moment related to interpretation, the interpretation of American art or art? What comes to mind?
Whose turn is it to answer first? Okay. I'll go. I mean, it's hard to think about proudest moments, and you have to say, because I have the privilege of leading a small team, that a lot of my proudest moments have to do with when my team tells exceptional stories, and stories that develop in a way that I myself would not have been able to even see or understand. But I think that when I think about a recent proud moment, and specifically related to American art, I think about the audio guide that we developed for Diego Rivera's Pan American Unity mural. Because that mural, I think, is really a classic example of American art. He was a Mexican artist commissioned to paint the mural live as part of a live art making event during the World's Fair. And the mural itself is about how the United States and Mexico ought to come together in order to combat the global rise of fascism. That sounds familiar. And what we did, it was really wonderful, because we worked with a curator who had no inclination to be in the audio guide himself, and that gave us free rein to bring in a wide range of some art experts and some non-art experts in order to address the themes in the murals. So we had an indigenous rights activist who's also a practicing artist herself. We had a muralist. We had a man who'd worked at City College for decades and was actually the official historian of the mural.
Wow.
And then we had an art historian, but somebody who was not curatorially involved inside the exhibition. And what we did is we really leaned into each individual's subjectivity to weave their stories together. And part of the concept sort of behind the polyvocal strategies that we employ is to empower the visitor themselves to bring their own voice to bear in the interpretation of the artwork. But the other thing that I loved about this offering is that we edited it in such a way that and I say we because I worked with a fabulous team, including Santino Gonzalez, Christine Murray, Erin Fleming was involved in the development of it. I'm representing the work of many people up on the stage today, but we edited it in such a way that it could be listened to as an audio guide and a close-looking guide standing in front of the artwork itself, but that if you were driving in your car, chopping vegetables, doing whatever, you could listen to it as a podcast, and the VTS, the visual thinking strategies, would function as visual descriptions to call the images up in your mind eye. And for me, that multimodality, the ability to create an audio guide that can also be heard as a podcast really increases the reach of that content and also makes it evergreen. The mural's in the process of going back to City College right now, and that offering will be helpful to people forever.
Forevermore. Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Thank you.
That's awesome. I love that, thinking about it in being used in different ways. So for me, all power to the people, Black Panthers at 50. I had the incredible opportunity to work on that exhibition. For those of you who don't know, the Black Panther Party was founded in Oakland in 1966, and the Oakland Museum of California, it was sort of a natural fit. I don't know if it was so natural, but we decided to do an exhibition about the party in celebration of the 50th anniversary. And I worked with an incredible team of people on it, and the opportunity to meet many, 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 many former party members was just life-altering in a lot of ways, and to hear their firsthand stories of their experiences. I grew up in Oakland. I didn't really know very much at all about the Black Panther Party. It was not taught in school, surprisingly, or unsurprisingly. And so for me, it was just, on a personal level, it was incredibly powerful to hear these stories. And I think working on the project, we wanted to bring all the things that we were hearing from all the Panthers about their experiences to the exhibition. And, we realized that people need to know why something like the Black Panther Party would need to be created. Why you need a Black Panther Party. I think a lot of people don't think about, at least at the time, I don't know that a lot of people, I'm gonna say a lot of white people weren't really thinking about the fact that Oakland was racist, and that there's a history of racism even in the Bay Area. So the fact that, I think we working on that project, we're discovering that and learning that and really wanting to share that with visitors, that we need to talk truth about this story, and we need to have the voices of all the people who live this experience present in this exhibition. And so what we ended up doing was, because we were having these incredible conversations, creating a video where we interviewed Panthers and also young people carrying out the legacy of the Panthers today. Because we recognize that those voices are really important as well, because they were learning from the Panthers and their work was impacting what was happening right now. A lot of those Panthers didn't get their due in their time, and so young people are really taking it to the next level in a lot of ways for them. And they're doing their work, but also I think there's a lot of sadness there that they didn't get to do or get acknowledged in their time, and that they were vilified. I could go off on this for a long time, so I'm not going to do that. But at any rate, so we brought those interviews into the exhibition. I will just say as an aside, we created basically a documentary, and it ended up being 44 minutes long. And at the time, I was talking with our folks on staff, and they're like, this is way too long to be showing in the exhibition. A video can only be 3 to 5 minutes long. And that's even like my kind of like interpretive rule.
Totally.
But I was like, no, people are gonna stay to watch this thing. I'm gonna push hard. I'm gonna push back on the fact this should be 40. We're gonna keep it at 44 minutes long. And we provided seating, and wouldn't you know, the people stayed an average of 20 minutes to watch this video. It was at the end of a very long exhibition. And I'm also really happy to say that, there was a lot of call for this exhibit to be permanent at the museum, and also, or for it to travel and things like that. And so luckily we were able to take the content from that exhibition and put a lot of it into our core gallery, which is ostensibly a permanent gallery, and widen it out to talk about Black Power. But so that is incredibly heartening to me. That video is in there, so that video lives on. It's on the internet. People can watch it. Similar, it has like multiple applications. The other thing that was so powerful for me about that exhibition was I have never, and to me it was like a career peak moment, I would say. I've never experienced the kind of community I experienced in that exhibition. It was like a third space. It was. I would go in there a lot, and when I went in, people were having conversations with each other. Strangers were talking. People who were finding themselves in photos and talking about it. People were there. People were doing impromptu tours. People were checking each other. People were also crying. There was a lot of crying. There was a lot of emotionality. The exhibit happened to coincide with the timing of Donald Trump being elected as president. And there, a lot of what the Panthers were fighting for were the things that we were living with in that moment. They are continuing, obviously they are still happening, still continuing, but the space actually became a place that people sought solace in each other to process that. And I've never experienced that in an exhibition. To me, that is like next level, like a next level thing.
I love that idea of a third space, and that's almost the hope for a lot of interpretation professionals, that's what we cultivate for exhibitions. One thing that you said that I thought about this, part of this multivocal, polyvocal approach is really to speak to the different experiences of audience members. So thinking about, for some folks, understanding that Oakland was/is racist is a new thing, right? And for other people, that's just old news, right? Totally. And so how do you tell a story for folks who are at the end of those spectrums and also everything in between? And I as someone who's gone to that exhibition, I really feel like you all nailed that really wonderfully. Side note, I got married at the Oakland Museum, and there's a picture in the core gallery that we took to honor that legacy in Oakland. So shout out to my husband. Anyways, I think we're running out of time slowly, but I wanted to ask you, and this is actually a question that Maria suggested that we ask you all, and this is about self-care. This work is, I would say, very meaningful, very fulfilling, and can also have other impacts. How do you all manage that? How do you put self and take care of self first?
Boundaries.
Say that one more time.
Boundaries.
Yes.
I recommend boundaries. As you said, Abram, this work is heartfelt. Like we're bringing our hearts to this work, and we believe in this work, and that takes a lot out of a person. And I found I'm learning boundaries myself. I'll just fully admit that. But I've recognized that I need to have boundaries around like when my workday is done, and like 5 o'clock I'm done, and that's so to protect myself and to protect my energy and my emotion too, and also to I'm a new parent, so I actually can't really work after 5. I have another job at 5, so that has been really important to me, and I think also like, for me to respect other people's boundaries as well. Like we're all individuals, we all got lots of other stuff going on, and so I'm gonna, as I would want to be respected, gonna respect that for you, so that I can bring my full self when I'm present at work, and then once it's over, I'm done, and I'm gonna move on. So there's that, and then I would also say, sorry to say this out loud, therapy has been super helpful. Kind of goes with the boundaries as well, I would say.
Amen.
Yep. So yeah, that also helps me reflect and have time to like process what's going on. Because yeah, this stuff is hard, but it's also important. And I think we, all the people that I work with have the biggest hearts, and our institution is values aligned. But sometimes, and sometimes when things are not going your way in a values aligned place, it can be really intense on all your emotions and what's going on for you. So shout out to therapy.
Therapy. Also therapy. It's interesting, I think, as and I'll be really honest, as a workaholic who recently fell off the wagon and is just fully back on it, I am back on the work, not on the boundaries so much. It's something that I'm really working to address myself. Therapy, walks, all of the things. I'm a parent of a young child, and I will just fully admit that I never had work-life balance at all until I had a child, and it is because when you have a child, your priorities just shift, which is great. I think that for me, the thing that really carries me through is maintaining a human-centered approach to my work, and that's my work in terms of the substance of what I do, centering audience, centering artists, centering community, but also in terms of the how that we really are best at collaborating when we understand that our colleagues are people and that we are people as well, and that we're coming to work as people first. And it's a culture that I really try to cultivate within my own team and with the colleagues I work with the museum at, because I work with some fabulous, hardworking individuals, and really living in constant appreciation of that helps carry me through even on the longest weeks.
Thank you. Wow. I know this really does, for me, feel like a living room conversation of interpretation professionals, like, 3 interpretation professionals walk into the bar. And
on a stage.
On a stage,
On
right?
a stage, ouch.
And what just happened ensued. So I just am so grateful for you all. Do you mind giving them a round of applause for sharing so vulnerably? Really, really meaningful. We have time for Q&A, so if there are questions in the audience, we have Maria who will go to folks with their hands raised.
Thank you so much. My question, a shift involves a shift towards some things and a shift away from some other things. So I was wondering, all 3 of you, if you might be able to name 1 or 2 things that you've had to convince the institution to stop doing in order to prioritize this work and to make space for it within everybody's workable work lives. Thank you.
It's a really good question.
I can start by just saying I think there are a couple things, and one is what I call decentering the institution and our production methodologies. So we started in 2016 a producer in residence methodology for our podcast, where we actually worked directly with a producer in residence who then worked with artists themselves without the institutional middle management, middleware of the curator and an inside producer like me also being involved in the conversation. And we shifted that approach to also be with video. So the producers are working directly with the artists to tell stories that end up being more authentic. So that's, decentering the institution in a few different ways, which I think is really important. Another one is not creating media for one specific context, really looking at, an audio guide that can also be a podcast, or thinking about a in-gallery exhibition video that can also have a life online, and making one thing that can function in as many places as possible, but at the same time being very clear about what the primary goal of that offering is. And I think that can really help focus your energies.
I think mine is just order of operation. Mine is inviting outside voices in at the onset, as opposed to 2 weeks before the exhibition opens. I think that incorporating those voices is, and it makes sense, right, in terms of how things used to be, but I think moving forward, really inviting experts, and I say that in the broadest sense, right, not just academics, but folks whose lived experience is their expertise early on as possible has been a huge shift.
Yeah, I'm sort of struggling to think about this. That's a really good question, Christina. I would say, like, similarly, like, thinking about our processes, I think we have been doing things in a certain way for a while, and like reflecting about, like, okay, what are we doing here, and like what is working and what is not working, and what, like, really examining and having project managers like really deeply look at, like, is this process for exhibition development working? Is this process for program development working? Is this process for how we do events? Like, really, like, getting into the nuts and bolts of that. It's not very sexy work at all, but I think it really makes it so that it makes it, I hate this word, it makes it more efficient for us so that we can do more of the creative work.
I think project management is very sexy.
Okay. I'm sorry to offend the project managers watching this on the live stream. You are all very sexy.
Said by the two Capricorns.
Yes.
Hi, so when I was a child in Boston, my grandmother used to take me to the Museum of Fine Arts. And there was this huge painting titled Watson and the Shark. And it was an American artist who had depicted this man falling overboard and the shark coming up, just right about to tear him to bits. And I remember thinking, this is incredible. I didn't know art could do this. It was my favorite painting, and I have a postcard of it in my house in San Francisco now to remind me of how I felt when I saw that painting as a child. Can the three of you tell me your most favorite American piece of artwork that you did not work on that has impacted you the most, and can you tell me why?
I could answer that because it's related to Erica. One of the things that happened on a Zoom, where we had a Zoom just to kind of talk about this panel, and it was in the backdrop of the room that I work in when working from home is a poster from the 2008 Frida Kahlo exhibition at the SF MoMA. And in particular, there was the media that was used to complement the show. I had a thug tear that fell down my face. Just the way in which the video, the audio complemented the paintings. I was intrigued, always interested in Frida Kahlo, and just the way in which the digital complements moved me spiritually has always stuck with me. And in that same spirit, I have the poster in my room. And I know that's your first show that you worked on.
That was the first show I worked on when I joined the interpretation team.
So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it's interesting because I think about formative moments, and, you know, in terms of American art, I have to say that the real formative moment for me was, it's interesting. It's like I became aware of Robert Rauschenberg and the Bread and Puppet Theater in Vermont around the same time as each other. And the idea that art could be made from anything, and in particular that art could be made from garbage, was a revelation to me. And did so much to, like, I honestly believe that creativity is a universal and vital living force, and that if we can empower people to connect with their own creativity and with the creative spirit, that we have so much potential as change makers. And just the understanding that you could take scrap material that you gathered from trash cans and, you know, the curbs of the city's streets and turn it into something speaks to such transformative potential. And I think that that's really, that formative experience, or those sort of twin formative experiences, are really what I carry with me when I think about the potential of art and the potential of human creativity.
Mm-hmm.
This question was hard for me to answer. Fully admit that. What's coming to mind is Ruth Asawa. just encountering her artwork, and particularly like her hanging pieces, her hanging wire pieces, and just the way that they're both like sculptural, but then and like light and airy, yet like weighty, and then the shadow is a whole other level of it, and then on top of it, knowing a bit about Ruth and about the fact that she was a working mother and an artist, and Asian American, and just what she an educator, and like she gave her life to teaching and making art for the rest of most of her life, and yeah, for me, I think I was just very impacted by Ruth's work. I had the pleasure actually of working with her a little bit, really with her daughters and cataloging her work early on before I got a museum job. But there was actually, so it's going to come back to the Oakland Museum of California, I'm afraid. But because I grew up in Oakland, I loved the museum, and there was a really amazing exhibit of hers with all of her children and all of their families. Basically, all had an exhibit together, and it was really powerful for me to see her work, to be introduced to her work in that way, and then also to see that it was like a communal effort. It was not just about her, but it was this whole community around her, of her family too.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. Both of you have dealt with controversial exhibitions. The Black Panther Party, I mean, as great as it was, I know it was controversial. And the Yayoi Kusama exhibition. And I've been, particularly that one, I've been watching the advertisements on television. And it's an African-American man who is a part of that. And if maybe some of the audience don't know the background, how did you deal with that, those kinds of things that were controversial, and turn it around to make sure that people would see the show? And with the Panther Party, that also was somewhat controversial. And can you tell me about some of the trials that you had to deal with in working with that? I know the Panther Party very well.
I know you do, Mildred. Oh, I guess what in particular are you want to know more about around the party?
Well, how did you? It's somewhat. I mean, the Panther Party was one of the great movements of all times. The Panther Party was one of the great movements of all times, but it was also controversial.
For sure. I think one of the ways that as I said, we had a lot of conversations with former Panthers.
Taking away the glamorization.
Let me speak, please. So one of the things that came up for it when we were having these conversations, we were recognizing the lived experience, lots of different perspectives, was that instead of talking about individuals, like this person did this person did this thing happened, and this thing happened, that we were going to talk about the aims and objectives of the Panther Party, what they were trying to do, what they were hoping for, and what they were hoping to accomplish, and they're really focusing on their education programs, their busing, their ambulance, like all of the work that they were doing in the community, and also highlighting things about the party that was not part of the media's portrayal of them. So the fact that they were really young, the fact that they were primarily women, the fact that they are utilizing the newspaper as a way of getting their message out, the fact that they were coalition building with people who are doing work for all oppressed people across all different colors and types of people. And so that was sort of our way of, rather than getting into like, quickly realized it was going to get real messy if we were like, well, then this thing happened, Huey did this, and then Bobby did this, and then this happened, and that was going to cause all kinds of problems for us. So we wanted to talk about what are the aims of the party. Yes, of course, there are all kinds of, in every community, there's all kinds of controversy and challenge and disagreement and messy stuff people don't want to talk about, stuff that people want to hide. We acknowledge that is all part of it, but that's not what the aim of the exhibition was. The exhibition was looking to talk about what was the intention that the party was trying to achieve So that's how we dealt with that.
You forgot the free breakfast program.
Oh, thank you. The free breakfast program, the most important one, the one that still continues to this day that the government took on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for this question. I think, obviously the Kusama exhibition is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about and a lot of time speaking with my team about in depth, because there's a lot of there's a lot of what I would say internally. There's been a lot more conversation about that exhibition and about the frankly racist things that the artist wrote in her books, and it's something that we as a team have had to grapple with. And what I have worked incredibly hard to do, in my role in interpretation, is to figure out how to represent those viewpoints and represent that dialogue when I come to the table to have the very necessary conversations of, how do we interpret this exhibition, and how do we, it's a surcharged exhibition, how do we give visitors a pathway through the exhibition that helps them connect with the artwork that they've come to see, and at the same time, how do we address these very, very real questions that have come up and the problems. And I'll just sort of going up a level from where I am. My boss, Gimyeon Giot, is working with our director of public programs and others in our education division to organize a public event to talk not just about Kusama, but about the harm that artists do or have done through their words and through their actions. Not just Kusama, but there are many famous artists whose actions and words need to be seriously questioned. And I think there's a lot in that institutions in the blue chip art world don't want to look at and don't want to talk about. And I think that this exhibition has given us an opportunity to have that conversation both internally and publicly. And for that, I'm really thankful.
Do we have time for one more? Awesome.
I was expecting a larger panel than this, a more diverse panel. The subject, the conversation that you brought up in the title, I expected to see a wider range of opinions. The panel is excellent for their particular points of view and their vision for museums. But museums are wide, large organizations with many different ventures. And I expected more people here who could present a wider variety of opinions as to the future of museums. Mm-hmm. I certainly myself have a different set of opinions, some agreeing and some disagreeing with the panel. And I wanted to see that wide variety. I don't see gender, race as particularly absolutes that must be used to guide a museum in their choices of people. But there are individuals who think it's very important, and they present a good case. But there are many other cases, and I was expecting to hear those other cases here, and when I came here. So this is perhaps a future conversation to be had here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question. I think what comes up for me is highlighting interpretation professionals. The folks that work in art museum interpretation are often behind the scenes, and they're unseen, and their work goes unacknowledged even sometimes. And when asked to facilitate a panel about interpretation specifically, I wanted to highlight some of the folks that I've been a fan of in terms of their approach. And so that's what you're seeing before you today. But I appreciate that maybe a suggestion of future conversations with a broader range of voices. But I'm really happy about the insights that we heard today. But thank you. And with that, I think we're going to to close, I do want to put a shout out actually for those that are interested in art museum interpretation. As it is burgeoning, there's an association for art museum interpretation, AAMI, that I encourage folks to look up and join if you're interested in really understanding the practice of this work, because it is, as has been mentioned, burgeoning and also full of really amazing professionals that are making impacts to how we interpret art, including American art. I do want to say that we have, this is the first of 2 panels, and so later on in the day, we're going to have a panel facilitated by Devin Malone, our Director of Public Programs and Community Engagement, with 3 artists that it's going to be wonderful. So as we wrap up, we have to exit the space so we could get set up for that program. But that program will be include American artist Diedrich Breckens and Rashad Newsom. It's titled Conversations on Creativity and Defiance in American Art. So we hope that you all join us for that as well. Have a good one. Thank you.